There's a very specific kind of tension that All in the Family understands better than almost any other sitcom. And it's not the loud, explosive kind that ends in a dramatic moment or a clean resolution. It's the slower, more stubborn kind. The kind where nobody in the room is actually willing to step back, even when it becomes clear that stepping back might be the only way to end things. And once you notice that pattern, once you settle into it, you start to realize that a lot of the show's most powerful episodes aren't really about what the characters are arguing about. They're about why they keep arguing long after the point where anyone could reasonably say, "All right, that's enough." There's an episode that captures this feeling almost perfectly, one where the disagreement doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't crash into the room with energy and noise. It kind of drifts in, almost politely, like a conversation that accidentally leans a little too far in one direction. And at first, it feels harmless, almost routine, because in this house, in this living room, disagreement is just part of the air. It's expected, it's familiar. It's almost comforting in its predictability. Archie is in his chair, of course, and that detail matters more than it seems, because that chair is where he becomes fully himself, fully convinced, fully certain that his understanding of the world is not just correct, but obvious, something that shouldn't even need defending, and when he speaks from that place, there's a weight to it. A confidence that doesn't come from careful thought, but from years of believing the same things without much challenge. Mike is there too, not in a position of authority, but in a position of readiness, because he knows, maybe even before Archie says anything, that this conversation could turn, that it could become something more than small talk, and he's not afraid of that, not exactly. But he's also not willing to let things pass unchallenged, which is where the tension begins, quietly, almost invisibly. Gloria moves between them, as she often does, not just physically but emotionally, trying to keep things balanced, trying to maintain some sense of calm, even though she knows, deep down, that calm is temporary, that it doesn't take much for things to shift, and brings something softer, something warmer, something that feels like it should be enough to keep everything grounded, even when it is. The conversation starts with something simple, maybe a comment about how things are changing, how people behave differently now compared to before, and Archie says something that reflects his discomfort with that change, not in a way that feels shocking, not in a way that's meant to provoke, but in a way that feels completely natural to him, like he's just stating something obvious. And Mike responds, not aggressively, not with the intention of starting a fight, but with a different perspective, one that doesn't align, one that gently pushes back, and that's all it takes, that slight difference, that small shift, for the conversation to begin transforming into something else. At first, it still feels manageable, like a discussion, like something that could go either way. But then Archie reacts, and his reaction isn't just about the topic anymore. It's about the fact that his viewpoint has been questioned, and that changes everything. Because for Archie, being questioned isn't just part of a conversation. It feels like a challenge, like a disruption of the order he believes in. And so he pushes back, not just against the idea, but against the act of being contradicted. Mike doesn't back down. And this is where the episode really finds its rhythm, because neither of them is trying to escalate the situation in an obvious way. Neither of them is shouting right away or turning the conversation into something explosive. They're just continuing to respond, continuing to explain, continuing to defend their positions, and with each exchange, the tension builds not sharply but steadily. Gloria steps in, trying to ease things, trying to redirect, trying to remind them that this doesn't have to turn into something bigger. But her efforts are complicated by the fact that she understands both sides, at least emotionally, and that makes it harder for her to fully support one without feeling like she's betraying the other. Tries to, in her own way, offering kindness, offering perspective, offering something that feels less like an argument and more like a reminder that they're all connected, that this isn't just about ideas, it's about people, about relationships, about the space they share. But here's the thing that makes this episode so fascinating, so quietly powerful. None of that stops the argument. Because at a certain point, it's no longer about the original topic. It's about something deeper, something harder to articulate, something that lives underneath the words being spoken. Archie isn't just defending a belief. He's defending a sense of stability, a sense of identity, a way of understanding the world that makes him feel secure. Mike isn't just offering a different opinion. He's pushing for a different way of thinking, one that challenges that stability, whether he intends to or not. And once those deeper layers come into play, ending the argument becomes much more difficult, because it's no longer about being right or wrong. It's about what it means to give ground, what it means to admit uncertainty, what it means to accept that someone else might see the world in a way that you don't fully understand. So they keep going. The conversation circles, revisits the same points, approaches them from slightly different angles, and you can feel as a viewer that there are moments where it could end, moments where someone could choose to step back, to say, all right, let's leave it there. But no one does. And that's what makes it so real. Because in real life, arguments don't always end when they should. They don't always stop when they've reached a natural conclusion. Sometimes they continue simply because no one wants to be the one who stops. Because stopping can feel like losing or conceding or giving something up that feels too important to let go. The living room becomes almost a pressure cooker in this episode, not because anything dramatic is happening, but because everything is contained, everything is close, everything is inescapable. There's no shift in location, no distraction, no break from the tension. Just four people, sitting, standing, moving around each other, but never really leaving the conversation behind. And that's where the show's groundbreaking nature really becomes clear, because it takes something that could easily feel static, something that could feel boring in the wrong hands, and turns it into something deeply engaging, something that holds your attention not through action, but through emotion, through rhythm, through the way people speak and react and misunderstand each other. The humor doesn't come from punchlines in the traditional sense. It comes from the way Archie insists on his perspective with such certainty that it becomes almost absurd, not in a cartoonish way, but in a way that reveals something about how people hold onto their beliefs. It comes from the way Mike tries to break those beliefs down logically, sometimes missing the emotional core of why they exist in the first place. It comes from Gloria's frustration, which feels less like a setup for a joke and more like something you've seen before, something you've felt, something that resonates on a personal level. And it comes from whose kindness doesn't solve the argument but changes its texture, softens its edges, reminds everyone, including the audience, that there's more at stake than just being right. What makes it even more powerful is the context of the time, the 1970s, a period where American society was dealing with massive shifts in values, in expectations, in identity. And those shifts didn't happen smoothly. They happened through conversations like this, through disagreements that didn't resolve cleanly, through families trying to navigate differences that felt both personal and political at the same time. The show captured that in a way that felt honest, not polished, and that honesty is what makes it still feel relevant today, because even though the specific topics might change, the experience of being in an argument that no one wants to end, that hasn't changed at all. As the episode moves forward, you can feel a kind of fatigue setting in, not just for the characters, but for the conversation itself, like it's running out of new ground to cover but still not ready to stop. Voices might rise, then fall, then rise again, not dramatically, but enough to signal that the emotional stakes are still there, that the tension hasn't fully dissipated. And then slowly, almost reluctantly, the argument begins to wind down. Not because it's been resolved, not because anyone has changed their mind, but because it can't sustain itself forever, because there's a natural limit to how long people can stay in that space without stepping back, even if they don't fully realize that they're doing it. The ending doesn't offer a clear answer. It doesn't tell you who was right. It doesn't tie things up in a way that makes everything feel settled. Instead, it leaves you with a feeling, a sense that something happened, something meaningful even if it didn't lead to a neat conclusion. And that's where the show's lasting impact really comes into focus, because it trusted the audience to sit with that feeling, to recognize it, to understand that sometimes the most honest stories aren't the ones that resolve everything, but the ones that reflect how things actually are. Personally, I think that's why episodes like this stay with you, not because of a specific moment or a memorable joke, but because of the way they mirror real experiences, the way they capture something that feels true in a quiet, persistent way. That feeling of being in a conversation that keeps going, even when it probably shouldn't. That sense of knowing that ending it would be the easier choice, but not taking that step anyway. And as the screen fades, as the room settles back into something that resembles normal, you're left with that recognition, that understanding, that this wasn't just a story about a family arguing. It was a story about why arguments continue. It's about why people hold on. About why, sometimes, no one wants to be the one who ends the fight. And that thought just kind of lingers there, gently, like the echo of a conversation that hasn't fully finished, even after the room goes quiet.